what it's really like to get a spinal tap. We're going to rewind back to 2016. I'm going to set the scene. We are in an emergency room. I'm technically in emergency overflow because they're so busy. They have no idea what to do with me, and it looks like I might have a viral infection. So they make the decision that I need to get a spinal tap. I'm not gonna go super technical. I'm not a doctor, but this is how they explain it. They essentially are going to put a massive needle into your back. That needle will then put in a tube. That tube will allow them to remove spinal fluid from your spinal cord so that they can then send it to the lab to get evaluated and find out whether or not you have any abnormalities, issues, things like that. I'll be frank. I haven't recorded this video and I've been avoiding doing this video. This one's a rough one. I honestly still have PTSD from this procedure, and I want you to know that this is my experience. I hope people out there have had better experience than mine. The situation that I was in was a little precarious, being an emergency overflow and things of that nature that didn't make it for the best environment in general for this procedure. I still am curious why I wasn't brought into an actual procedure room. I'm presuming it because, you know, it's ER and it's emerge and it's just a madhouse and this is just how it goes. But for people who are maybe watching this video because you might have a scheduled procedure that is coming up and you want a better sense of what things are going to look like, I will walk you through step by step what I went through. Just know the pain and the issues and everything that happened surrounding my procedure is hopefully not what you're going to have. I know that a lot of people have a lot of anxiety about this procedure. It is a fairly risky procedure considering how often it does get done. It's one of the most risky procedures. Typically they'll do MRIs and CAT scans and all these other things before they go to the spinal tap because it's so invasive, but sometimes it's the only way to really rule out certain things or to diagnose certain things. And so if you are having a spinal tap done, my heart is with you. I feel you. I know where you're at. I get it. Take a deep breath. It's going to be okay. At the end of the day, these doctors do know what they're doing. I have not had any major complications from that procedure specifically. This procedure was more of a mental thing, more than a physical thing. The actual procedure itself doesn't take very long, but it's an intense one. It's a scary one, so I understand where you guys are coming from if you're having to get one done. But at the same time, I want you to know that my story is a little bit more complicated than if you were scheduled in and getting a procedure done by a physician. We're in emerge overflow. I find out I need to get a spinal tap done. Due to this procedure and this typical procedure, I wasn't allowed to have anyone with me during this procedure, which with COVID and things, I don't know what that situation still looks like, but I was on my own. And that was probably one of the hardest parts of just not having someone there with you going through this procedure, because I essentially had this resident doctor be like my support system in front of me as the procedure was happening. He wasn't that supportive, which didn't help the situation. It's one of those things that if you can have a support person around, they're gonna have to be fully gowned. This procedure is highly susceptible to getting infections, and you do not want an infection in your spinal cord. So they take things very seriously when it comes to bacteria and things with this procedure due to the nature of it. You know, they're literally putting a needle into your spinal cord. It's a dangerous one, and you want to make sure it gets done properly. The procedure itself goes like this. Essentially what will happen is, I would hope that typically you'd be put in a room and all this fun jazz. But the way it went for me was there was this group of 6 people that walked into my bay because it's just curtains. We're in emerge, right? The doctor tells me that she is not going to be the one doing the procedure, but it's going to be one of her resident I believe she called him an intern at the time, which, didn't make me feel much better. He was an emerge resident, and he made the mistake of telling me this was the first time he had done this procedure, which doctors out there, if by some miracle someone is watching this, please never tell your patients that this is a first for you. They don't want to hear it. Even if it is, they really don't want to know. They prepare my back. They essentially get me in this standing fetal position. So I had my knees up, I was curled over. So you're supposed to essentially bend your back into a C curve or a C shape as much as possible. And essentially what happens is that kind of opens up your spinal cord so that they can go through the disc into the gooey stuff between your spine and into the spinal cord to get the fluid. And then once they've prepared the area for the procedure itself, they warn you not to move. And this is by far the most critical part, because the reality is they're shoving a massive needle into your spine, and you moving could essentially paralyze you. It doesn't happen a lot. There's a higher risk of bacterial issues than there is paralyzations. I know it does happen. I know the rates are very low, or else they would do this procedure even less than they do them. Essentially what happens is they first freeze you. This is where things kind of went awry with my procedure, is when they went to freeze me, because of the emergency setting, they could not allow the full 15-20 minutes to freeze my back completely before they went in with the very large needle that goes into your spine. I wasn't completely frozen, unfortunately, when they went in, but due to the circumstances of me being an emerge, they really didn't want my spine opened for any longer than they needed to, which, I can understand. They then go and put this massive needle in, and essentially what happens is this needle also has a tube inside of it. The tube is essentially the opening for them to get into the spinal cord, so that once they remove the needle, there's essentially the tube going from the spinal cord out to your back, so that they can actually drip out your spinal fluid. They only take a couple drops depending on what they're doing. That part is actually what they say is the easy part. They say the freezing part's the worst. I personally thought that them removing the needle, the massive needle, I guess most likely because I wasn't completely frozen, once the needle went in, I honestly didn't really feel it, other than it was uncomfortable, really uncomfortable, but them coming out was more uncomfortable. It was a lot worse because it actually wasn't done properly. They had to actually go back and do it again. So I actually technically had 2 spinal taps done. At one point, the attending physician had to come around and kind of leave me on my own in the front, because she was helping her intern kind of hold me in the right position to actually help the resident behind me, because my spinal fluid wasn't coming out and they were having a lot of issues with it. Due to that, they actually ended up having to do a lot of wiggling and tugging on that tube that was in my spine. And due to that, the doctor did warn me that because it was such a challenge getting this fluid out of my system or out of my spinal cord, that I would have quite a bit of bruising and pain post-procedure. We'll talk about that in a second. Once they actually get the fluid out, it's bing, bang, boom. They take the tube out, and that's pretty much it. It's such a small hole when you really think about it. There's no suturing, nothing like that needs to happen. Once the tube gets pulled out, it's essentially, that's it. The only additional precaution that gets done is you are left on your side in a very specific fetal position to allow your spine time to recover from the procedure. It's one of those things that the doctors tell you should take a day or two. I ended up feeling the pain from this procedure for about 2 weeks. It wasn't until I was on my way home after emerge, after spending almost 2 weeks in hospital, that I actually started feeling the back pain kind of go away. So my recovery was a lot worse, but I was also bedridden at the time. So I don't know what part of that was the procedure and what part of that was actually my body just unable to recover from it. This is such a hard video for me. This procedure was honestly traumatic. Not having anyone there to support me before and after was really challenging. It took about an hour before Luke was able to come back into the room once they were all done. Things just took forever, and that's probably due to the nature of the emerge more than the procedure itself. But the entire situation, I think, just made it more traumatic than it needed to be. That's my spinal tap story. That's the procedure in a nutshell and how I was feeling at the time. Unfortunately, I actually have to get this procedure done again. It has now been almost 6 years since I had my last spinal tap. I am not looking forward to this next one. My doctor and I have talked about it, and it's one of those things that it might just be time to do it again. The last time I had it done, the results came back inconclusive. There was no specific result that came of it, which is kind of why they want to do it again. My doctor is concerned that the way the procedure was done the first time, that it wasn't necessarily done right, or the complexity and complications of the state I was in at the time made things challenging, and due to that, we didn't get any results from that spinal tap, which I think kind of makes everything worse. Knowing that you went through all of that and didn't even get a yes or no or a positive or negative, it was just inconclusive because of complications at the lab. It's one of those things that I am not looking forward to the next one. I really hope that I have a better story for the second one and things go much more smoothly and that there are less complications. And if that's the case, I will definitely revisit this video and share with you guys my second spinal tap story. But the first one back in 2016 is one that I would like to forget. Unfortunately, it's one that I've been through. Can't say it's made me stronger. It's made me truly understand how small procedures, and I say small with asterisks, like this one can really make things very complicated very quickly. Small complications that they talk about that can potentially happen with things like colonoscopies and spinal taps and these procedures that are done fairly routinely. These complications still do happen, and that you should just be aware of them. Don't let them stop you from having the procedure. I think most of the time, and your doctor should be the one to really make this call, but I would say most of the time, the benefits of the procedure outweigh the risks of the procedure, and that's why we do what we do and we get these procedures done. You still need to be aware, and I think you need to make sure that you have these discussions pre-procedure with primarily your family doctor about either the way you feel about a procedure coming up, the way things are going medically. You need to have these conversations with your doctor so that your doctor knows where you're at. My family doctor is very well aware of this first procedure and how I felt about it. And that's in part why we've waited as long as we did to get this second procedure done. I think we may not have waited as long. Actually, I don't even know. I don't even know if the trauma of this procedure would have changed anything the way we did it, but it's unfortunately time for me to try this procedure again, and we'll keep you guys posted. Last time we weren't recording things the way we do now, and so I hope to potentially even bring you guys with me. I know you guys won't be in the room with me. That's unfortunately not something that's going to be able to be done, but hopefully we'll have a more step-by-step for you guys on how things went and just a little bit more behind the scenes of how things are going to go into this new procedure and into this second spinal tap. If you're interested in that, please let me know in the comments down below. And if you have absolutely any questions about spinal taps or procedures that I've had, or questions you may have in general about things of this nature, by all means, please leave them in the comments down below. I am always open to questions and comments. If you want to keep it personal and don't want to put it on YouTube, there's an email down below. Please feel free to send me an email personally, and we could chat there as well. I hope you guys have had a wonderful day, and don't forget to slow your roll. We'll see you next week. I have an entire playlist of all the procedures I've had. Check it out over here.